By Hamdi Ali. Since the failure of the 1960s attempt to engineer a modern Somali state that has its roots outside, a decades-old debate started. That is based entirely on the attempt to fit a thousands-years-old Somali nation into the 19th century European framework. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, let me demystify for you what is really Somali nationhood, and whether that narrative can or will stand. Today I want to speak to you about a profound misunderstanding, one that sits at the heart of every debate about Somalis, Somalia, Somaliland, borders, recognition, and the Horn of Africa as a whole. It is the repeated attempt by diplomats, analysts, and foreign entities to fit the thousands-years-old Somali nation into a 19th century European Westphalian framework. This is not just an intellectual mistake and misleading. It is a distortion that shapes policy, fuels conflicts, and blinds you from the truth and the reality of who the Somali people are. Let me begin with a simple truth. Somali nationhood did not begin or start with colonialism and cannot be defined by it. For thousands of years, long before Britain, Italy, or France drew their lines on a map, the Somali people lived as one cultural world, united by land, heritage, language, and by faith, united by pastoral life, united by xeer, united by poetry, united by memory, a nation not created by borders nor defined by them, but by the bonds of all the above. And these bonds were not fragile. They survived empires. They survived invasions. They survived every power that looked at the Horn of Africa and imagined it could be conquered, but failed. The proof is in the pudding. A nation with one land, one culture, one heritage, one language, and one faith, undivided. Yet when the Somali question is raised today, what is the prevailing narrative we hear? We hear about the so-called British protectorate. We hear about colonial treaties and colonies. We hear about administrative boundaries drawn by those who barely set foot in and barely understood the land they were dividing. We hear the arguments that appear to have captured those currently purported as the Somali elite, that treat a brief colonial episode as if it were the defining chapter of Somali history, while ignoring the centuries and millennia that came before it. This is the mistake. This is the distortion. This is the attempt to force Somali nationhood, an ancient, organic, resilient entity, into a European model of the nation-state that was never designed for Somalis, by Somalis, and is unfit to explain them. The European model assumes borders create nations. The Somali experience shows nations can exist without borders. The European model assumes centralized bureaucracy is the foundation of political life. The Somali experience shows that social contracts, clan federations, and negotiated authority can sustain a civilization. The European model assumes identity is territorial. The Somali experience shows national identity can be cultural, linguistic, and spiritual, and still be stronger than any empire. So when foreigners debate about Somalia and Somaliland recognition, they often do so through the wrong lens. They treat colonial borders as if they were sacred. They treat legal technicalities as if they were history. They treat Somalia as if it were an artificial creation when, in fact, the artificial creation was the colonial map that divided one people into 5 borders and many more inside them. Somali unity is not a political slogan. It is a historical fact. It is a cultural inheritance. It is a lived reality that predates every international modern institution. This does not mean Somalis have no disagreements. It does not deny grievances, wounds, or the political failures of recent decades, but it does mean that any discussion about the future must begin with an honest understanding of the past and the present. A nation that survived thousands of years of external pressure cannot be understood through a framework invented in Europe 2 centuries ago. A people who resisted every empire cannot be reduced to the wishful thinking and paperwork of colonial administrators. And a civilization that has endured drought, war, displacement, and political collapse, yet still speaks one language, still shares one culture, one faith, and still recognizes one another as kin, cannot be dismissed as a failed state. Somalis are not a failed state. Somalis are a successful nation navigating a failed framework imposed from outside. The world must learn to see Somalis as they are, not as the colonial map imagined them to be. If the international community wants to engage with the Somali question honestly and fairly, it must abandon the idea that European borders define African nationhood. It must recognize that Somali identity is older, deeper, and more enduring than any protectorate or mandate. And it must understand that the future of the Somali people cannot be shaped on the misunderstandings of the past. Somali nationhood should not be up for debate by others. Only the Somali political arrangements can be. And those arrangements must be shaped only by Somalis, based on Somali history, Somali culture, and Somali agency, not by the frameworks of others. Thank you.